evening and welcome to Restoration Talks. I'm Shazara Melody and this is my co-host, Dr. Amanda Brown-Bennett.
Hello.
And we are back. It's been a while, but we are back. We started Restoration Talks during lockdown and we spoke about various subjects, just having conversation on things that were affecting our community as Christians, as Black Christians. So we spoke about things like prostate cancer and how that was wiping out the Black men in our community. We spoke about mental health and suicide and helping young people that were struggling with their mental health and not being in school, and even adults and parents who were homeschooling and going nuts whilst trying to do that. Mm-hmm. And we spoke about other subjects like in sickness and in health, when my mum was sharing on her journey, helping my dad go through prostate cancer. And that was a very special episode. And today I'm going to be sharing about my journey with grief on losing my mum in 2021. So it's been about 2.5 years now. And a lot of people ask me about my journey, and as a pastor's kid or just as a daughter and now being a motherless daughter, and how I've handled that journey. And I would know a lot of people watch, they may not say a lot, but a lot of people watch how I've sort of walked this journey out. So yeah, I'm ready to share my story. I know Amanda asked me months ago if I wanted to talk about it, and I said, yeah, no, there's no way. And I never imagined that I'd be able to sit and have a conversation about losing my mum. But today is the day. So over to you, Dr. Amanda.
Yeah, today is the day, and we are here. And, you know, I don't take this lightly. I consider it a great privilege to have got the call to say, yeah, ready for that conversation now. I know it's not easy,
No.
but I do believe that this is another stage, another step in the healing process, and hopefully that is something we'll be able to do even in this conversation here, you know, for you and for any other listeners as well who may be experiencing a very similar thing. Mm-hmm. So thank you very much for your openness, I'll say in advance, you know, your willingness to be so transparent with us. And, you know, before we go into those questions, because I do have some questions to ask, I think it's important that we get a little bit of context in terms of what we're talking about when we say loss and grief. Mm-hmm. So loss is the act of losing someone or something, and grief is our emotional response to loss. This is the way that an individual may personally respond to an actual or a belief that something or someone has or is being taken away from them. Mm. Emotions could include anger, disbelief, shock, numbness, fear even. But our emotional responses are not predetermined, in that we cannot know for certain how grief and loss are going to impact us. Mm-hmm. As mentioned, grief and loss can be linked to the death of a loved one, but it may also relate to the loss of a job, of possessions, finances, etc. And we can experience grief and loss of people who are still very much alive, but do not seem to be the person we once knew. Or we don't have the level of relationship that we once had. Mm-hmm. Things such as physical or mental health, life changes, relationship breakdowns. We can grieve parts of ourselves even, and our own lives that have changed. How many times do we say things like, I used to be happy, or things were so much easier before, pining after the things that were that no longer are. So this is what we're talking about when we're saying grief and loss. And you may have heard of what we call the processes to grief and loss. And so these stages are what we call denial, which is a feeling numb and trying to carry on as if nothing has happened. Anger, becoming angry that the loss has occurred. This anger can be directed at the person who has died or ourselves for the things we may have done or not have done. We try to find some sort of blame somewhere. Bargaining. And this stage involves the person hoping to end pain by actively bargaining, either with ourselves or with God, if you have a faith. Going over a lot of things. Maybe we have lots of what ifs, questions. There's also a stage we call depression. And this is quite expected and anticipated loss, you know, a stage of loss, where we become quite sad about the loss itself. And then the final one is what we know as acceptance. And at this stage, individuals tend to embrace the inevitable loss. We may not get over the loss, but we start to believe that we can live again. our emotions of grief tend to ebb and flow, sometimes triggered by a memory or occasion, and other times it's almost like a wave. And when I thought about this, a description came to my mind, and I imagined almost a calm sea with no apparent disturbances, and then this almost almighty mass of a wave comes sweeping over everything in its path. And so this is my, basic psychologist sort of description. But actually now what I would really like to do is turn to you as a survivor of grief for your understanding of grief and loss. Now, when I thought about how I was going to introduce you, I wondered if survivor was the right term, and I was quite interested that you actually said that you consider yourself to be a survivor of grief. So can you say more about that?
Yeah, I think grief is just so... There's just no words to describe how damaging it can be. And after you've experienced a loss, getting through each day feels like a survival. Doing basic tasks feels like you're doing survival of the fittest. Do you know what I mean? So it doesn't feel like I'm a victim of grief, but every day that I'm learning how to live after going through that traumatic experience, it feels like I'm a survivor. It feels like, okay, cool. I did it yesterday, I can do it today, and you do end up living in survival mode. And there's no way around that, to be honest with you. That's just what it is. Life after loss is just surviving the rest of your life. That's how it feels, yeah.
I just want to ask, can you give us a little bit of an insight into, what does living in survival mode look like? Just in case, people don't understand quite what that means.
So I would say living in survival mode can look like everyday basic tasks. So say, for example, you've got the brain fog, you've got all these kind of things that just start to go wrong with you after you've experienced a loss. Like your body and your brain is just not functioning with you at that time. It doesn't feel like living anymore. That's what life after loss, it doesn't feel like you're living, it feels like you're surviving. Yeah.
And just thinking about this idea of surviving, there are a number of things, in actual fact, that you have survived. Are you able to tell us a little bit more about your journey and how that may have impacted your experiences of grief and loss as well?
Yeah, I think reflecting back, I spoke about this in a TikTok video a couple of weeks ago. No, in fact, it was in a blog that I'm writing called Grateful But Grieving. And I spoke about the last time that I felt truly grateful. And I remember it was in August 2021. Now, I was going through divorce at the time. I had moved back home with my clothes in black bags, gone back to my parents' house after a failed marriage, absolutely devastated and heartbroken. Dad was going through cancer at the time. My parents were foster carers, so I was helping them with the foster children, and I was literally just rebuilding and starting my life from scratch. And it hit August 2021, and I was at home for about a few months, I would say. And it felt like I had just healed. Like I got to a place where I was okay with now being single. Dad had got his all clear and had his operation. We were going through COVID at the same time, and I remember just laying in bed and thinking, oh my gosh, God, I'm just so grateful. My family have made it through COVID. The church has made it through COVID. My friends have made it through COVID. Do you know what I mean? All the loss, my heart had felt like it was healing, and it was like, okay, cool. I don't know what's next for my life, but you know what, God, I trust you. And I felt like I just got my life back on track. I'd saved up all my money. I was buying my first flat, and I was just in that kind of mode where I'm like, no, I'm rebuilding my life and I'm getting my stuff together. And that was August. And then Mum died September. And that just knocked me right back to where I'd started before. And it was just, it was wild. It was wild. It was like, God, I just about made it through that. Like it took me a long time. It took me a long time to get to the place where I thought, okay, not just being okay, but now being grateful. I felt like going through all that situation, it stolen my my joy for life or my gratefulness to God for life and all of that kind of stuff. So to get back to that place where I'm like, no, in all things I can give thanks again. That was hard, but I made it back to that point. And then the very foundation of my life had then been taken like weeks later. There's just no words to describe what that did to me. Yeah.
You know, as you're speaking, you've mentioned a number of things there. You've spoken about, you know, various forms of grief and various loss that you've experienced. You spoke about God in that as well, and, you know, your understanding of him, I guess, in the midst of all of that. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe, you know, what was your relationship like with God during all of that was going on? I guess in a sense we can't separate out those different situations from each other because they were all happening to you at the same time. You know, so what were those conversations like? We can't be in those with you, but what were they like, if you can recall any and share?
I remember, I think I was having a conversation with my brother at the early stages after we lost Mum, and I was trying to describe to him the moment because Mum had sort of I was talking to her one minute, sitting down watching TV, she didn't feel well, next minute she collapsed and she was gone. It was in minutes. And I remember trying to explain to my brother, I said, I heard my dad calling me and I could hear by how he was shouting my name something was wrong. So I went running into the room and that was it. The moment I entered the room, I knew she was gone. And I remember saying to my brother, it was like God had entered the room and said, Caroline, come now. And just left with her. That was it. There was no debate, there was no waffle, there was no discussion, there was no struggle. It was just a come now, go. So there was an element of me that was grateful that my mum didn't have to suffer. There was an element of me that was grateful that my mum had a peaceful, beautiful ending. She died in the arms of her husband. Do you know what I mean? She collapsed, my dad caught her, and that was it. That was her ending. She died in her home, in her bedroom, in the arms of her husband. And as tragic as it is, it's a beautiful ending. The part that I struggled with was, okay, but God, you're a healer. Do you know what I mean? You healed my dad from cancer just a couple of months ago, and then out of nowhere, you think, oh, who can I take next? Let me pick the most faithful person that I've ever met in my entire life. Do you know what I mean? That's what it felt. So it just felt like, God, but why? This didn't make sense. And I think the struggle was, I think the struggle with faith was, okay, I'm grateful that my mum didn't suffer, but I don't understand why her time is up because there is so much more that I felt was in her that needed to come out. Like her time wasn't done yet.
Yes, I can hear that real conflict.
It's not even was, it is a huge conflict. There are times where, like you mentioned earlier in the stages, where it feels like you're in the acceptance stage, and I accept, my loss, I accept my grief, I accept that, mum is not here anymore. And then there's another stage of you that's still just like, I can't understand this. Like, how do you expect me to continue living after going through this? Or continue even believing everything that I used to sing about and speak about or share about my faith. I didn't see that in my own life. I think even linking back to like what we spoke about a bit earlier, the main things that I had wholeheartedly prayed for, because there were hours that we were trying to revive mum and blah, blah, blah. So my marriage and my mum, the two biggest things that I needed God to come through for me on. And they were the two major losses. But I could pray for a nice house, and I could pray to, raise money for a deposit that could come out of nowhere. I could pray for a very nice car, and I could pray for so many other things that could come about. But the main things that I really cared about, that I really desired, those were the things that was like, no, I'm going to take those. Yeah.
You know, as you say that, something comes to my mind, something that I listened to recently in a preacher, it might have been T.D. Jakes or somebody, and also something that I read in some of my work with a client, is about this conflict that we can be in. It can be very difficult for people to understand how you can sit in two spaces at any one time and both can coexist. And when I say that, I mean that, you know, you can experience a faith in God that he can do it, you know, and it's still at times experience doubt that something isn't going to work out in the way you want. You know, you can still believe that God is a healer, you know, and still sit there and realise that there are some things that maybe aren't going to be healed. You know, you can feel happy, you know, that mum is at peace, and at the same time be grieving that you've lost, you know, and it's sometimes sitting in that place of experiencing both of those, what feels like very opposite feelings that sometimes cause people to feel quite confused about their emotions. And so what I'm really hearing with you is that real conflict, especially, I guess, for us as believers, because there is something that we have that's different from those in the world. You know, we know we have what we call a hope. And so we don't see situations in the same way, you know.
Exactly.
And it's how do we navigate that? How do we understand that? How do we go through that when actually what I believe and what I know isn't what I'm seeing, but I know I still have to believe. And I, you know, my faith is there that God can do it for people, but why he hasn't come through for this, but I still believe he can do it.
That was exactly it. That's where I feel like my faith had struggled, because I had no doubt that God was real. I believed in my heart and that would never change. What I struggled with is, why don't you come through for me? Why is it I can pray for people, I could lay hands, I could do all of this, and I could believe God? The amount of other marriages that I've helped to save, the amount of other people that I've helped to pray for, and, you know, their results have come back clear, and this, that, and the other. And it's like, God has stood in the gap for all these people. And I can see your hand moving and I can see you coming through. But when it comes to me, it's like, nah. And that's what's hard. And I think what was difficult is when, as a believer, your faith is what you stand on. It is your comfort. So when you're challenged in that area and it feels like you don't have that level of comfort because it's something that you're wrestling with, that was hard. Where going to church was my safe place. It was a place where I could just, even if there was no one there, I could get the keys and I could go and I could just sit and go to the altar, or I could just pray, or just being in that building, even in the midst of dealing with anxiety and divorce and all that kind of stuff. The moment I entered those doors, it was like I could feel God's presence, and it brought such a sense of calm. After I lost mum, it was the biggest trigger. I could not get through the doors without being in tears or without my heart just palpitating, because it was like, this was her workplace, and it doesn't feel right being here and not seeing her walking up and down with a bunch of keys in her hands, do you know what I mean, or flapping about, or it just didn't feel right. And it even took me back to the times where when we had church during COVID and there was only like six of us in the building. Remember when we used to, and it used to just be mum sitting on the back row, maybe Pastor Cleve sitting there, and there was just like the worship team and the pastor, and that was it. You weren't allowed no one else, and we would just do our recordings, and that was it. So then those moments where it's like I'm leading worship and I can always see her and I can always look for her and those things. And so my faith being a comfort, my church in terms of just the building being a safe place for me emotionally, and a safe place just to go to and meet with God. When those things now turn into a trigger, because there was an aspect obviously of blaming God for taking my mum, so that messes with your faith, do you know what I mean? So going through loss and going through grief whilst dealing with those feelings, when normally anything in your life you run to your faith, you know what I mean, you run to the house of God, but not feeling like you can because it's so triggering. That was hard, and that's where you experience the depth of loneliness that words can't describe, because there's nothing that in those moments that you think can fill that void, because everything is so painful.
So thinking about that, because you were a big presence in the church, on the praise and worship team, in the apostolic team, you know, tell us, what has that been like since? So we're hearing what you're saying about actually once upon a time it was a place of refuge for you, and then it became a place that was very triggering because it was so connected with your mum. What's that like now for you in terms of church?
Oh, so I had stepped down from, well, firstly I took a sabbatical, and grateful to Martin Orville and yourself who stepped in and helped to run the areas that I was looking after at the time. So it started off as a sabbatical, and I remember Minister Orv saying to me, Shad, you know it's time for you to come back soon, right? And I was like, yeah. Because I had agreed a year, and the year had come and gone. And I was like, I am in no position to do anything. Just getting to church was hard enough. And I was just like, I ain't got nothing more to say. I've got nothing more to give. I am just about making it here. And I don't want to be one of those leaders that are doing it out of duty or doing it out of people's expectation of you to just keep it moving.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it. Like, and I think, you know, we've got amazing people in our church, and people are really supportive and understanding and sensitive to that. So there was never a push. There was always the encouragement of, you know, sis, we really miss you. But there was never a push to be like, you've got to be back in ministry. So yeah, going through that, and I remember having the conversation with Dad, because it was months, it took me months to be able to just say, not for anything that he did, but for me to even acknowledge that I need to not just be on a sabbatical, I need to step down completely. And then to vocalise that and say, you know what, Dad, I need to step down. I can't right now, I can't do this. I can't try to navigate this trauma and people still view me as a leader when I can't lead anyone. I can't even lead myself. So yeah, now I'm just trying to rebuild my faith. Yeah.
And can you say a bit more about what that looks like? So what does rebuilding your faith look like to you?
At the moment, it looks like not just having the conversations of why with God. I think in my prayer times, there are times where I just sit there and I want to pray, and I'm like, God, you know what? I really miss you, but I don't know what to say to you because I'm just so heartbroken. Like, I miss us, like, I miss what we have, and I don't know how to get back there, but here I am right now. That is predominantly what it looks like. And I'm not ashamed about that. It is what it is, you know. Do you know what I mean? Like, it is what it is, and I think sometimes we've just got to be open and honest. Like I said, praying for other people, no problem. If someone calls me now and says, sis, can you pray for me? I'm praying for you. Because like I said, like, my belief and my faith hasn't gone anywhere, but it's when it comes to my life, that's where it's like, okay, God, on my personal journey and what you want from me and what my desires are, what your desires are for me, that's the part where it's like, okay, how do we get back in sync? So yeah, it feels like baby steps right now. Baby steps is the fact that, okay, we're talking again. And yeah, I'm open to conversation now. Yeah. So I wouldn't quite call it, you know, super prayers. But how I was anyway in my faith, it was just I'm always conversating with God. God is always on my mind. He's in every conversation that I have. So yeah, it's just getting back to that place where that conversation, that closeness is building again. Yeah.
And you know, sis, thank you for your complete vulnerability, because, you know, I think we need to have these conversations. We need to be open and real, because I think a lot of the time we we hold on to the fact that, well, you know, if I am a Christian, then my faith needs to be up here, and I can never waver, and, you know, I've got to be strong in the Lord, and then the power is my... And we say all these things, and don't get me wrong, that's what we want to have. That's how we want to be.
Yeah.
But the reality is there are times when our experiences are telling us something else.
Yeah.
And it is a thing of daily where, you know, we are trying to say, God, I'm trying to leave this at your feet. You know, I'm trying to push past my feelings. And we know that, you know, that we want to be at a point where we can push past our feelings.
Yeah.
But our feelings are also very real.
Very real.
And what I'm hearing you say is that, you know, that part of this is about you almost reconnecting with God.
Yeah.
And it's in a different way. You know, with trauma, I was explaining trauma to someone this week. And what I was saying is, with trauma, life as you know it changes.
100%.
So your whole world changes, and after a traumatic event or series of events, what happens is you now have to work out how to live in this new world, because now you have a new perspective based on what you've been through. You know, and so what I'm hearing is that what you went through was a series of traumas, actually.
100%.
You know, what happened with your own marriage, with dad's sickness, you know, the COVID, and having to represent the church through such a difficult time. And then what happened with your mum being so sudden, and also you being there. Whilst being there, you know, lots of times when we're not there, we worry and wonder what would have happened if we were there, but also whilst being there adds a layer of trauma in itself.
100%.
And so you're trying to navigate and make sense of all of that. And so what you've done is you've awoken to a whole new world and another way of trying to relate and find yourself in this world. There's this, as you were speaking, there was this quote that I found some months ago, and thankfully I was able to find it again. Now, it may or may not relate to you. You may think, no, that's not me. But I just want to share it with you and see if you have any viewpoints on this. So it says, if anyone asks, I restarted in safe mode instead of normal mode. I was shut down improperly. Nothing was saved, and I don't know how to do this anymore. And I thought of that as you were speaking.
Wow.
What do you make of that in terms of what you're saying about, you know, your faith, your experiences, the traumas, life?
I think that quote says it all, you know. That perfectly describes life now. And I think as I was sharing just a bit beforehand, like, there is such a fear now of avoiding closeness to not experience that level of loss again. Do you know what I mean? And obviously I know the Christians are going to say you need to pray against that, blah, blah, blah. Of course. But genuinely, when you experience loss, you have a fear of losing again. You have a fear of loss again. And I think it even reminds me, I remember having a conversation with my dad, because when I was buying my house, I was supposed to sign for my new flat about a week after my mum passed. And I was like, oh no, I'm going to just give it up and I'm just going to stay at home and I'll look after dad, blah, blah, blah. And dad was like, no, you need to move out. And I remember even after losing mum, the fear that I had of losing dad as well, overwhelming. If I did not hear that man breathing next door, I'm outside his door listening, because you know that whole, was it broken heart syndrome or whatever, like when one partner dies and the other dies straight away. I was almost certain, with the way how I felt God was unfair, that was going to be it. And it was just so overwhelming. And Dad was like, no, you need to move out because I'm not your child. Like, you need to come out of this house, because you can't be like waiting up trying to make sure that I'm breathing every minute. But it was just unreal. So yeah, there is an element that you feel you haven't fully kicked back into normal life. You are living life with trying to dodge and be in safe mode. Yeah, 100%. That's so perfectly described.
You know, you said something there about love and vulnerability, and I think it's so key, you know, that the moment we dare to love, we make ourselves extremely vulnerable. Vulnerable to being hurt, betrayed, you know, and loss. And it's one of those things that come with love. We want to love, but actually often what gets in the way is the moment I love you, now I'm vulnerable. You know, and that is something that often gets in the way of even relationships, you know, and can be most experienced in its depths in times of loss. Just on to the next question. You know, you mentioned family, you spoke about dad a little bit, and I know earlier you spoke about Irie as well. What was your position in the family during that initial time of loss, and what would you say your position is, has been thereafter?
Whew. What was my position? Listen, I was chief organizer. I remember getting back from the hospital. You were there. Got back maybe just after 5 a.m. Went to the little room at the time, laid down, and then I thought to myself, people are going to start coming to the house. And I was outside mowing the lawn at like 7 a.m.
Wow.
Because I was like, people are going to... And before you knew it, the doorbell was ringing, ding, 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 ding. People were coming around, you know what I mean? And I was like, we need to mow the lawn, we need to get food, we need to do this. And I just went... There was no time to process grief. I had to just get things done. And I think what I have, honestly speaking, found difficult, I wouldn't have had it any other way. But there was a lot of things that I had to take the brunt of that were traumatic during that time of loss and deal with, that has changed me forever.
Can you say more?
So in terms of doing my mum's hair and makeup, along with my aunties being the last person to see her before we buried her. So like the day before we went and we made sure that she was dressed correctly. There was so much, I swear, I wish I would tell people, like I joke about it, but it wasn't even funny. There was so much contention around just trying to get my mum buried. At one point they had lost her body because they had moved her from one hospital to another and we couldn't locate her, and that took a couple of days. And I'm like, how do I tell my dad this? Do you know what I mean? And then we had the whole petrol crisis where there was no petrol.
Yeah.
So then we had to move the funeral, and then the funeral home had a gas leak, so then they couldn't move her body, so then we had to move the date again, and it was all kinds of kerfuffle. Kerfuffle. Then they said, they can't put a gown on her because she's swollen up too much, and I was just like, cut the gown up the back, zip it up the front, but that is what she's wearing. And we had amazing people that were looking after her, and they were like, okay, cool, we got it. We just wanted to let you know, but we got it. But there was just so many different things that I had to sort out and organise, writing mum's eulogy, getting all the information for that. And it was, that was my role. And I remember actually it was the day before the funeral, my brother had said, look, he wanted to come to the funeral home. And I had just been in there with Auntie Dorrit, Auntie Orly, and Auntie Diana, and Auntie Bernadette. We were all in there, and at different times and whatnot. And I remember seeing Mum, and I just said, you know what, I've got to firm this memory. And I said to my brother, don't come. Just remember Mum how you remember her. And that part is what's hard. Because that's the part that I would live with forever. And like I said, I wouldn't have it every other way, but I also recognise I had to willingly take on trauma for the team. Because there's no way that I would have buried her without seeing her, but I didn't want anyone else to be traumatised either. So it's like I had to take on that image, dressing her, doing her makeup, whatever, with help. And thank God that they were there. But yeah, I had to take one for the team. But I knew that in doing that and in doing those roles, I would never be the same again. And I'm like, I can live with that. I don't know if everyone else can live with the fact that Shaz ain't going to be Shaz no more, or Shaz as we know it. But I knew that part of me was gone forever. Like, you can't go through those traumatic experiences, even with me and Dad taking it in turns, trying to do CPR on Mum or whatever. You can't do that to someone that you love and still be the same. There's just no way. There's no way. So going through that, I would say that my role was almost as protecting my family as well. I knew that I took on a lot. And like I said, I wouldn't have it any other way. I would do it over and over again to protect my family. Because there was, where it's like, okay, out of the three of us, Dad's got his calling, my brother is amazing in his calling. And I'm like, you know what? I don't want anything to get in the way of what they're called to do and what they need to do. And I know that this is going to change. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like my dad already knew. He said, no, I can't go. He already knew. My dad knows his limits, and he was like, yeah, no. But I was like, okay, well, if you ain't going and you're her husband, I'm going to have to go. So it's like, okay, I'll do it. And I wanted to make sure that everything that I wanted on her was on her. So like different types of jewellery and whatever. But yeah, like I said, it was taking one for the team.
What I'm hearing, and please correct me if I'm wrong at all, I'm hearing 3 different words come to my mind. So one of them is sacrifice.
Yeah, that came
so
to me.
It felt very sacrificial what you did.
Yeah.
I heard you mention your brother's calling, your dad's calling, and nothing getting in the way of that. And I wonder if you feel that maybe some of your own calling or, you know, parts of you have been sacrificed in having to go down the path that you did. The other 2 words are necessary. So I'm hearing all the busyness and all the things that you did and how much of that felt necessary. You were talking about any minute the door's going to be knocking, and let's be real, as the family that you are, well-known, pastor's family, you know, I can imagine that from the moment that the news got out there, you know, there was lots of people probably wanting to rush on in, and we know that is something that tends to happen, especially in the early stages, and I can only imagine how overwhelming that could have been. And that sacrificial part of you would have wanted to be able to protect your family from too much of that, and took the brunt. And so some of it felt like it was necessary. And the other word that came to my mind was avoidance. And I wonder if there was parts of you that was almost in some way trying to delay or deny your own grief in throwing yourself into so much for everybody else, for, you know, what your family need and what other people might, you know, need externally and what the church might need. And what that was doing is putting on hold everything that perhaps felt way too difficult for you to have acknowledged for yourself.
100%. I even remember at my mum's funeral, like, I remember getting to a point, I think it was at the wake in the after bit, and that's when I broke. Obviously there were moments of crying and other bits, but I literally went into such planning mode that there was no time for emotions. I had blocked it all out. Do you know what I mean? Even when I look back at when I went up and read the eulogy, I was like, how did I even do that? Like, people must think that I'm emotionless because I went up there and I just read out the thing and was just cool with it. And yeah, it was only afterwards where I absolutely fell apart. And that's when what's the word? Yeah, that's when it hit. That's when it hit.
And, you know, just to say, you mentioned that people may have thought, you know, you were emotionless. Actually, there was a strength. And I know that strength is one of those words that can grate us. Because actually, sometimes in the midst of some of those deep, difficult situations, we don't want to be seen as strong. Don't tell me I'm strong. And as a black woman, let's be honest, there is this title, strong black woman. You know, and in one sense you defined that, you demonstrated that. But in another sense, I can see how sometimes that can get in the way of sometimes people recognizing even that vulnerability. So can you tell us a little bit, what was support like for you? What did you need? What did you get? You know, what was that part of the journey like for you?
That's interesting. I think I'm grateful that I had such a community of people that really knew me. So they knew what I needed and when I needed it. Because although I was strong, there were spaces that I could go to that allowed me to not have to be so bulletproof, to not have to be so hard, that I had safe places and friends and family that I could just fall apart in. And so support even looked like normality sometimes. You know, when you had a friend that just said, oh, do you want to go for a coffee? Just completely blanket whatever the hell you're going through right now, but just the normality. Oh yeah, let's go for a coffee. And you know what? Those moments, those are the things that I look back on and I'm like, I remember that. I remember planning mum's food or whatever and just getting a random phone call like nothing had happened and just doing something normal. So having places where you could just press pause on the grief and trauma and just have a normal experience. But then if you're not able to manage, it's not, oh, you're not your usual self or whatever. There's that understanding that, okay, we're out for 2 hours, but we may get a good 50 minutes out of her before she shuts down. Do you know what I mean? But there's that understanding there that I can't cope in things like how I used to cope. It's just not in me anymore. I just can't do it. Do you know what I mean? Support came in various ways. And one of the things that I even found supportive was people doing practical things like giving us suggestions. Like, I'd never planned a funeral before. I hadn't lost anyone super close to me like that before. So we didn't know where to start. Do you know what I mean? So there were just things. So when people gave me suggestions of funeral homes and this, that, and that, and I really wanted like my community to deal with mum, put it like that. So yeah, talking to people that had been through it, even down to my brother's godmother, Auntie Carol came round and she said, you know what, knowing your mum, my mum passed a couple of years ago and this is where we buried her, and I think your mum would have loved it. Now, if you know my mum had her own plot, she had everything paid for, everything sorted out, whatnot, planned her own funeral, she had it all locked down. We didn't really have to do anything much, you know what I mean? She had it all down. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. And I went with my auntie and we went up there and we drove around the place where we buried mum, and I was just like, oh my God. It was just so peaceful, and I'm like, this is that resting place. So just giving suggestions, you know what I mean? It changed the whole direction of you know, what had already been planned, but it was just so helpful in terms of we would never have known, but that is exactly where we would be, where we want her to be, do you know what I mean? So having your community help you with practical things. You know, someone asked me to do a video on this, I was going to do that actually. Practical things. So even when it comes to admin, if you've got someone that you trust, that you can trust going through paperwork and finding bits and bobs, do you know what I mean? Like doing all of that, helping with all of that. There's so many different little meetings. You've got to go and pick up death certificate, and you've got to do this and you've got to do that. If you've got free time, and if you have the personality to handle those environments, and you're sensitive and you're caring, and you can sit in meetings where you're going through coffins and picking out this, that and the other, that just being there to support, not always having something to say, but just your presence. I had friends that would come to the house and just wash up. Do you know what I mean? Like friends that came and brought food and brought this, that and the other. Aunties that would bake patties and fritters because people were just coming around non-stop. We had tubs of jollof rice that was getting delivered to the house, and the community showed up, but those things were so helpful navigating that time in terms of support. And I think personally I had really close friends that had gone through loss as well, and just having those people to talk to and to kind of I think sometimes people are unsure whether you want to talk about the person that you've lost or not. And some people can feel, oh, I don't want to trigger you. I'm triggered 24/7, sweetheart. Okay? So having people that weren't afraid to bring up my mum, that I want to talk about her. I want her memory to stay alive. If you remember something about her, I want you to tell me and not feel like, oh, shouldn't I? No, tell me. Do you know what I mean? So having conversations where it just felt normal to talk about her, and it wasn't, you know, a pity party or a sad thing or whatever. It was just conversations to acknowledge her life here on earth, and that she wasn't a faded memory or something that's just going to drift into the background, but knowing that she still lives on through conversation, through what we do, through the things that we learned about her, and her impact is still here on earth. So her still feeling tangible.
No, That's a really important message, you know, and leads on to the next question, actually. I think you've probably answered it in a number of ways. But actually just thinking about, you know, us as a community, as a church community, how do you think we respond as believers to people going through grief? You know, what are your sorts of experiences and maybe even advice around that?
Do you know what? One thing that I love about our community is that we have the best intentions. We want to be there with you in your times of sorrow. We will walk with you, we will pray with you, we'll sing with you. You know what I mean? We'll be there at the deathbed. We will do all these things to make sure that you're not alone, and we pull together in these times. One thing that I will say that I struggled with is that sometimes I feel like we can lack sensitivity. It's not deliberate. It's not always intentional. But sometimes when a person has gone through trauma and grief and bereavement, whatever, they are so delicate. And sometimes our words can be so harsh. What we feel is encouragement can be so harsh that it's not soothing to the soul. It's offensive and it's damaging. So I would say that sometimes those are the things that we need to reflect on in times of loss. Just being a little bit more sensitive. Yeah.
So in that sensitivity, you know, obviously we're not trying to out anybody or name it, but in the sensitivity, what sorts of things would you say maybe we could avoid, you know, and maybe what sorts of things would be useful to say or to do?
Avoid telling someone who has just lost someone it is well. It is not. It's not. Quite frankly, and no one wants to hear it. No one who has just lost someone wants to hear someone telling them it is well. That is one of them. I think it goes back to what we mentioned earlier in terms of being strong. I know people mean well, and there is an element of you that does have to be strong. But if there's any time in my life where I can fall apart, and where I feel like my people, my believers, my God-fearing brothers and sisters should have me, it's during this time. I shouldn't have to feel like I have to be strong. This is the time where it's like, okay, you may not have the strength, but I've got the strength. I'm going to be strong for you. Do you know what I mean? So even saying things, instead of saying be strong, you don't have to be strong right now. Do you know what I mean? But I'm here to hold you up. Just rewording things, you know what I mean? Because like I said, it's with good intentions sometimes, but sometimes it's just not helpful. And just being sensitive around those things. And like sometimes when you don't know what to say, don't feel like you have to come with a deep revelation to answer my questions of why. Because obviously I think with my mum's sudden passing, it was just like no one could understand why, and everyone was trying to make sense of it. But in everyone trying to make sense of it, there was an air of confusion where I remember some people saying, you know, well, sometimes in spiritual warfare, you know, we lose soldiers on the battlefield. And you're thinking, what? So what, my mum's a casualty of war. That's what we're saying. And that wasn't helpful. That wasn't helpful. That was quite offensive, to be honest with you. And then obviously that then makes you question even more what you're dealing with in terms of your faith and all of that you're going through. So I would say, we pull together amazingly as a community when it comes to these things, but just be mindful. And if you don't know what to say, there is nothing wrong with saying my condolences. Like I said, we don't need a deep revelation. I'm thinking of you. You're in my thoughts and prayers. That is fine. There is nothing wrong with saying that. Even drop an emoji with the little praying hands or whatever. There is nothing wrong with doing that, because I understand with loss, it can, you know what I mean? No one knows what to say. Even now, when I've lost my mum, if someone else has lost someone, I'm like, oh my God, what do you even say? Because I know there is no words that can bring the level of comfort that their heart is desiring at that time. But my condolences. You're in my thoughts, you're in my prayers. Do you know what I mean? Do you need help with this? Can I do this? Do you know what I mean? So sometimes it's not even just, if you need me, let me know. I don't know what I know from morning till night after those. My brain is everywhere. So you tell me what you can do. And if I need it, I'll holler you. And if I don't holler you, don't get offended. Okay? So yeah, I think that is.
And I think there's something in that just about recognising, you know, our responses to people when they're going through tough times. You know, that it is, as you said, it's out of a good place, but we often struggle. It's uncomfortable to sit with somebody else's discomfort.
Yeah.
When someone is feeling hopeless, we can often feel helpless. And out of that need, it's like we want to be able to extend our hand. We want to feel like we're doing something. And so sometimes we do, you know, we try to think of, as you said, these long, thoughtful, powerful encouragements. We try to do certain things. And actually, what I'm hearing is sometimes all people just need is just be a presence, just be there. Sometimes less is more. When you were speaking, a scripture came to mind actually in Exodus 17, verse 12, and it's one I referred to actually recently with somebody, and it says here, when Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone, put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one each side and one on the other, so that his hands remained steady until sunset. And I think that's so beautiful because it's showing his own humanness in that moment, and he had a job to do, but he was tired. And instead of them criticising or telling him, Moses, do it like this or do it like, they just literally came alongside, took either side, and I'm almost imagining him just about to collapse, and they come either side just to prop him up so he can keep going until sunset. And as you spoke, I thought of that in terms of sometimes that's what people just need. Just prop me up until my sunset. You know, prop me up while I can't prop myself. I don't need the words. Just be there to hold me up.
Do you know, funny enough, I feel like I had that experience when I was going through divorce with the worship team. Being a leader at that time and going through that and trying to lead a team, and they're like, boo, we need to lead you. Okay? But having that support where it was just like, you guys just got in my business, and you know what I mean? But it became I think that's how we built such a sisterhood, because it was like, no, we could see that we need to lift your hands right now and we need to help you stay steady. So we're going to get in your life, we're going to get in your business, and we're going to help you get out of this. And so, as you said that, I'm like, do you know what? That is exactly how that moment felt. And then even when, I can't remember if I was on the phone to you or Shaz, when the ambulance had taken Mum, and I called and said, and you see, I think it was you, and you said to me, do you need us to come? And I said, no, it's all right, there's nothing they can do. Like, we've got to go to the hospital and say our goodbyes. Dad had gone with her. But they said there's nothing they can do. They can't bring her back, so we just need to say our goodbyes. And I said, there's no point. And then when I got to the hospital, and I think me and my brother were in the room, we came out and I saw you and Amanda and Tash, and you were sitting with Dad on the bench outside, and my heart was just like, these girls have done it again. They've come in that moment to lift up their leaders, do you know what I mean, who are facing just a mad time. And they had come to lift up our hands, and it was, so that fits perfectly with my life. And
that is important to have that support. I think you have done a really good job of helping people to recognise how they can support someone else going through grief. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add, just, you know, to advice to those supporting people that you could mention before my last question to you.
No, I think it covers it with the sensitivity. And I think one thing that I will kind of just emphasise on is don't be offended. That person that has gone through grief or gone through change, gone through loss, may change forever. They may never be the person that you remember them to be. They may not, you know what I mean? It can alter your whole personality. So even if you knew this version and they've experienced a loss and they've now become this version, learn how to love them in this version. We're human. I know you may miss certain parts of how they used to be or whatever, but learn how to love this version of them without placing the demand of trying to get them back to normal, because sometimes that can happen with people and they can go back to normal and they can learn how to live again and everything's fine. But what happens if you can't? And what happens if you don't?
Yeah.
So just not to be offended by the change if they're not doing the things that they used to do. So say, for example, if you were the kind of person that you were the go-to person to go out with, do you know what I mean? Even if it's just going out for a couple cocktails or whatever, and you're no longer that person, don't be offended if it's like, actually, no, I just want to stay home. Don't take it personally. It is not you. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes people just can't manage the things that were normal to them anymore. So yeah, just don't be offended, because I feel like sometimes when offence can be in the mix, it can cloud everything. When people take things personally, it's got nothing to do with them. So it's just understanding in that moment, sometimes you have to put yourself aside, not to say you're not going through your difficulties or whatever. Of course, we're human, we all go through things, but your friend may not, or your family member, whoever, may not be able to show up for you as they did before. They may not have the capacity to show up for you as they once did. And learning how to love them through that and be okay with that. And I think for a person who is grieving, I would say learn ways of how to self-soothe. Learn what you need that helps to bring you comfort. I think one thing that I did often, every month I would book myself into a hotel in another city, go for a long drive. For the weekend, I'm off and I'm just by myself. And I needed that time to self-soothe, that time to regulate, where I'm not having to... And I didn't feel like I had to always pretend to be okay, but I feel like there was elements where I couldn't show my grief in front of people. Not for any particular reason or that anyone has done. I'm just not very emotionally expressive around people. So I could be out the whole day, at work the whole day. The moment I get in my car, it is a meltdown. Do you know what I mean? So there were elements of me where I felt like it built up so much, and I'm like, I need to release all this grief and this emotion, and I only feel safe doing it at that level when I'm by myself. So boom, I need to go away for the weekend, and every month, every weekend, I would be away. And I needed that time, and that's what helped me to kind of self-soothe. So find things that you need, that you know, this helps me to live, this helps me to survive grief, this helps me to keep moving. Yeah.
You know, as you were saying all of that, what came to me is just how much of a knock-on effect. It's quite a ricochet effect, isn't it? Grief and loss. It doesn't usually just affect one person, but it can actually be widespread, and it's on different levels. There are those who it impacts, you know, intensely, those in that sort of inner circle. But it has a wider spread. And even as you're talking about the offence, you know, not being offended, oftentimes the person taking the offence or being offended is actually experiencing a form of loss and grief themselves. Absolutely. Because they're loss of that relationship. Absolutely. In the way that they knew it to be, that person in a way. And as you said, it's about recognising, you know, that actually there's something about being patient. There's recognising that it's a process that everybody is going through, that is impacted by the loss. And actually it's about everybody learning to live again after loss, isn't it? Learning to live again after the loss of that person, of the changes in the people connected to that person, because there will be inevitable changes, you know, and it's recognising how those changes might impact on the remaining relationships, you know, and it's in finding new ways to strengthen those, new ways to grow together, exactly. And not expecting things to be the way they were, because as you said, it's not the same. It's not the same, because that person has changed. Shara, I just want to thank you for your absolute transparency with us. I know this wasn't an easy one, but I do believe there'll be lots of people listening that would have been touched in some way by what you've said, whether directly themselves or whether in terms of being a support to somebody else. You know, and you've allowed us into your world in a way. And I know that's going to be important for many people, you know, in the faith, those outside of the faith as well. you know, and so I want to thank you. And I also just want to say, you know, we are continuing to stand with you and to pray with you as you continue to navigate this journey and this stage of the process for you. I just wanted to basically ask if there was any final words as we wrap up.
I think I'd just share, I never thought that I would get to a place of being able to talk about loss or talk about grief. And randomly, I remember just sitting in my room and just having this moment called Grief Reflections. And I just started recording little videos, reflecting on grief and different parts of it. And specifically when people would ask me questions like, oh, how are you really coping? Or how did you cope going back to work? And how did blah, blah, blah. And just giving those answers and recording. So through that, I thought, you know what, I wanted to create a safe space for my community to be able to grieve. So I've started building a community of grievers on Instagram and doing sessions where sometimes you don't, not even that you don't want counselling or you don't need counselling, sometimes it's not that what you need. Sometimes you just want to talk about your person. And everyone's got different experiences. So where I'm quite grateful that I've got a lovely family and lovely friends who don't mind me talking about my mum, there are so many people that I've realised that don't have spaces where they can just talk about their person. So I've set up a community of grievers where you can book sessions where you can just talk about your person. You can talk about your memories and you can reflect on your grief, you can reflect on your journey. We share coping mechanisms with each other. We share different ways of how we've learned how to live life after loss. And it's become a real safe haven, just being able to communicate with other people and learn, you know, look at other people's journeys as well and learn from them and what I can do and how I can rebuild life and things like that. So if you are going through that, please do connect with us. We're on Facebook, Peace of Mind _ Grief Reflections, and follow along for the journey. You know, this isn't it. I think next time Dr. Amanda's going to be interviewing our pastor, my dad, on finding love after loss and he's sharing his journey on getting married again, starting a new life and all of that. So I'm really looking forward to big changes, but really looking forward to that. I know a lot of people have asked, and just like even people will ask me like, oh my gosh, like how, like where did this new lady come from, and your dad's getting married again and blah blah blah, and it's such a buzz and it's beautiful to see. So I'm glad that he's open to sharing his journey. So that will be coming out soon as well. So yeah, stay tuned. Till next time.
Goodbye.